All right. Good afternoon and welcome to our next session of our Always On virtual series. This series is designed to provide you with thought leadership throughout the year and provide a deep dive into the trends that are transforming the way we do business. Today we are joined by Principal Consultant John Vosberg and Director of Collaboration Solutions Brian Mahoney to discuss Unified Communications as a Service. At the end of today's session, John and Brian will address your questions. Please use the Q&A function below the presentation to submit any questions you would like to ask our presenters. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining our session today. I know you all have a busy schedule, so I really appreciate your time today. So, as stated, you get my lovely face here. My name's John Vosberg. I've got 20+ years in the industry, focused on networking, voice over IP back when it was just that, and currently with UC and UC as a service. I've worked both on the vendor side and also in the customer space working in higher education. So the agenda here is what I want to provide for you is food for thought as it relates to migrating to UC. I will not be diving down into any vendor-specific products, but more of a general theme that relates to moving to UCaaS. What we'll go over is why UC as a service, what's the buzz about it, the types of UCaaS, because there are different types, and what would fit best in your environment, and then kind of go over the planning associated with that. So why UCaaS? So basically, the market has seen a significant rise in UC as a service. In fact, Synergy Group has seen a double in UCaaS seats since 2015. So you've seen this in the appearance of new UCaaS companies like RingCentral, 8x8, and Fuse. You've also seen a larger focus by the existing UC solutions providers like Cisco and Avaya to beef up their UCaaS service. Cisco just recently spent $2 billion acquiring BroadCloud, and that really was to help shore up what they're doing in the UCaaS space. We're seeing UCaaS as an annual growth rate of 26% over the next 5 years. And in 2018, we saw enterprises grow by over 57%, and that's with 1,000 employees greater. 36% in the mid-market, 100 to 1,000 endpoints, and then small businesses, we're seeing about a 23% increase in the UCaaS seats. Now, this is not to say that UCaaS is going to take over. It just means that this is kind of a shift in the market. Premise systems aren't going away. There are still businesses and government sectors that require premise-based solutions. So it's just more of a shift, and companies and vendors are really focused now on being able to address this shift. So what are the reasons behind UCaaS? So first off, it's ease of administration. There are many applications and devices required to support a UC solution. And I won't dive into it, but if any of you that are familiar with the OSI model, the 7 layers, all the pieces are involved in this, the physical and data link. So you've got the networking requirements. You've got the IP addressing and bandwidth, the sessions and how applications talk to one another, and then the actual presentation and applications of those. Each of these require a certain amount of administration and monitoring. So that's the ease of administration. Then also we're looking at reducing support and maintenance burden. So how often do you have to upgrade your network, your servers, your hypervisor for that matter? And then on top of that, there's the application. Most of these upgrades require an outage window and coordination with other administrators and also your user community. With less infrastructure to maintain, it just means that there's fewer man hours that you need to dedicate to monitoring and upgrading these services, which can create a significant drop in your cost of doing business reflected on your talent within your organization. So we also look at lower upgrade costs. Time is money, as I had stated a little bit earlier, and the time your engineers are spent upgrading these systems costs you money. So it'd be nice to be able to farm that out. Also, we're seeing a lot of customers that are very focused on real-time scalability. To have that nimbleness is something that IT departments are challenged with these days. Whether or not this is through growth or acquisitions or seasonality, does your business ramp up during the holidays, during healthcare enrollment? In some cases, if you're education, at the beginning of the school year and getting prepped for that. So you've got those seasonality challenges also. Along with the pace of change as it relates to pace of change as it relates to talent. How do you keep up with these changes in technology? Good people are harder to find these days. Cloud-based UC requires a minimal maintenance and IT expertise compared to on-premise systems, which means you can focus on hiring talent to drive your core business functions rather than spending time and money trying to find IT experts in a very high demand, low supply market. So this is an interesting graph that I came across recently, and it really looks at the pace of change as it relates to time. So when you look at this, you can see that the red line is the technology and how that is changing over time, and then the black line is the life cycle of that technology. And when you look at it as it relates to UC and Ip Telephony, you've seen these changes, and you can look at that first horizontal red line as being the first era, which is the Switchboard Pbx. And that was happening, from about 1900 to 1960. So that's a 60-year period where there were changes, but they were very incremental changes. Then it changed to the second era that I'll call the automatic PBX or Pabx, as you may have heard it. And that's more the TDM-based systems where people would own their own PBXs. And that was very prevalent from the 1960s to 2010. And it's, they're still out there, very few of them, and these eras don't end hard. It's a gradual migration out of these. But that one's lasted a good 50 years, so it's shrinking down in time. The third era now is IP PBXs, which kind of started in the year 2000 or so. And as of, 2008, 80% of all new PBX installations were IP PBXs. So once again, it's shrinking down in time. And the last piece is the fourth era, which is unified communications, where the IP PBX remains, but now we're adding a lot of additional services in, including IM, chat, presence, video, soft phone, unified communication. So UCaaS allows you to leverage the expertise of your partner who works with this day in and day out. So instead of having your staff to have to ramp up and keep up with these constant changes, instead you can rely on a partner or a vendor who keeps up on these technologies, works on it day in and day out, and allows you to keep up with that technology curve. So then there's the total cost of ownership. I'm sure you've seen this slide around for a while. So when we talk total cost of ownership, we're talking the full gambit of costs, which is repairs, maintenance. We were talking about upgrades, the services associated with it, the support cost. Security is also a huge piece to solutions provided, and then training. But then there's the purchase option, and many are using a CapEx model where you're purchasing most of that up front. But when you're buying these services and these applications, what you need to also take into account is depreciation. So that plays into your total cost of ownership associated with it. So keep that in mind as you're computing this out. Now, when you look at the cost breakdowns associated with on-premise, managed, and cloud, when you look at the on-premise, it's the majority of the burden, which is the purple there, is a focus on yourself and the skills and the costs associated with you supporting that infrastructure. We then have the software and the hardware and all that. So that's the on-premise cost, where the burden is on you. Then there's the managed services side of things, where you could have a partner in who does the management, the monitoring, the help desk support, which relieves you of a lot of the burden, but you still have to support the operations, the infrastructure, the software. When we move to cloud, it kind of goes, the involvement and the requirements on the customer side are much less required than they are in the other models, and the partner takes on most of that burden. Now, what's interesting is of these three cost models, traditionally what we're seeing is a plus or minus 10% between each of these cost models. So you may hear a lot in regards to significant savings associated with going cloud or on-prem. It's really, what we're seeing is just the cost is shifting. A lot of it depends on terms of the contract and what you're getting for services with it. But we're seeing only about a plus or minus 10%. So we need to ask, what is UC to you? So in many cases, UC starts off with the core, which is voice, being able to support general telephony type feature sets, being able to make a call, put it on hold, conference, and all that stuff. But we're seeing it expanding now to bring in video. So this could be through conference rooms, it could be through desktop applications and being able to use video. So we're seeing that expand. We've also got instant messaging, where chat capabilities and being able to have discussions with others within your organization. 9 times out of 10 now, when I am going to contact Brian as an example, I'll send him a message first saying, hey, are you available? Or we'll start chatting about something, realizing it's just way too much typing, and I'll go ahead and escalate to a call. So being able to do that. Mobility is also a key feature now, where the ability to have remote workers get a lot of the same feature and functionality that they have on premise to have when they're at a coffee shop or at home, so to be able to address those. There's collaboration and conferencing. So meetings, how does your company deal with meetings, and how are you integrating not only the desktop and the phone, but also maybe the conference room? So how that ties in. Then there's another piece of document share. Many customers are looking at document share also as part of this, or they'll look at how do I integrate my existing document share capabilities that I've got. And then the last piece is contact center, and this ties into your UC system. It usually ties into your CRM. Businesses are finding it more important for outreach now with customers, and also the modalities of interfacing with your customers is changing such that it's more omni-channel based, such that you have web chat, email queues, SMS, and such. So we're seeing that happening. I don't know if you've ever gone into your favorite online retailer and there's a chat window that comes up and they want to ask you if you have any questions in regards to the product. It's those type of functionalities that are tying into contact center. So let's talk about the types of UC as a service. So I'm going to start off with kind of the architectural components associated with UC as a service. And this is, when we start from the bottom here, we usually are starting with data centers. And data centers have the power requirements, the cooling requirements, and the network connectivity into those data centers, redundant network connectivity. You then place on top of that is your compute or your servers. So your servers provide all your CPU, your RAM, your disk, and hardware for supporting the applications above. Then in almost every case that I've worked with a customer, there's a level of hypervisor in there. In most cases, it's VMware. And what that does is allow you to migrate compute resources between different servers. So it gives you incredible nimbleness in being able to move services around. Should you have an outage in a server, you can move those compute resources to get another server available to you. And provides that level of redundancy in your compute environment. Then everything needs an operating system, so the operating system then sits on top of that, and that provides the bridge kind of for the application to talk to the memory and the disk and the network to provide those real-time services to your endpoints at the top there. Then finally, there is the session border controllers, or the edge. And what the SBCs do is they provide secure connectivity to internet traffic, to Pstn, and to other cloud-based services. And those provide a very integral part, almost the firewall in a way, be it firewalls are still required for your infrastructure. So let's look at how these apply to your premise-based architecture. So what we've got in this situation is you've got your typical dual data center design, where the various data center and application resources reside. You then have in the upper left corner, you've got your identity services, traditionally LDAP that we see, and your DNS, which does the IP to name mappings, and it also provides an interface into services available to your users or to devices, so that if you need to discover where a service is, you'll consult DNS, and DNS will say, hey, go to that server, go to this service available. You then have the SBCs, or let's start at the top where you have your wide area network. In many cases, we see a lot of customers going to SD-WAN in this situation. And then you've got, so they are viewed as internal to your network and they connect to those services. Then have Pstn services on top of that, where an SBC acts as a proxy in a way between devices out, Joe's Pizza Shop down the street and your internal calls. It also allows you to hide your IP addressing from the rest of the world. And the reason that's important is because of the way voice over IP works. It is a direct RTP stream that generally happens, and you really don't want your phone to be contacting directly some device that could be out on the internet. Instead, you want it to kind of proxy through this and hide the IP address space, because it helps with RFC 1918 addressing. So then we look at the internet connectivity, and that's important because we are still using cloud services. So in this case, certificates. And certificates are critical to all deployments these days due to the fact that they provide a mechanism to share keys so we can have secure communication and validate who we're talking to in these situations. So for those of you that may be familiar, you've worked with certificates. You may love them or hate them. Most people hate them because they can be difficult to deal with, but it's just a necessary evil to work in this environment. But one of the pieces here that I also want to talk about is being able to talk business to business. Now, we're seeing more of this. I want to be able to talk to another business, another educational institution, another partner, where I can get more full features. Now, the way that's disseminated between the two is if I'm dialing a phone number, which is called an E164 address, I'm going to be going out to the Pstn. So that allows me to call Joe's Pizza down the street. But there's also the concept of a SIP URI, which looks like an email address. It has that same formatting with the user ID at a specific domain. And that's another way to establish phone calls. This has been around since for years in the video space. So what this does now is it expands out different ways of being reached, whether or not it's a conference room or you yourself. Now, this has a minimal impact these days because people are integrating more with their LDAP directories, and they are selecting contacts within their environment. So my application, I'll click Brian, and it'll just establish a connection to Brian. I really can't remember Brian's phone number to save my life, but at the same point, I can easily click and ring him up, whether or not that's being done through a SIP URI or through a telephone number. So now when we look at the cloud architecture, basically we've shifted all the compute out to the cloud services. And what this does now is it allows you to have access to these applications through what's a portal, which is that emblem there above the cloud service. So you have a web portal now going in to be able to look at and configure users if you want to, devices and such. And that will allow your users to then go through the SBC, register to these devices or to these applications, and allow you to establish calls, whether or not they're E164 or SIP URI. Now, this is important to take into account because when you're looking at cloud services, most cloud services right now don't have a level of survivability. So when we start talking about private cloud, which I will in the next slide, it'll give you some of the benefits associated with going to a cloud or private cloud because you can get survivability, which doesn't really exist right now in most of UCaaS providers. They're looking at it. A lot of them are headed in that direction, but we're not seeing it in the market right now. Another piece here is if you look at the Pstn, the SBC does reside in the cloud services in many cases. In some cases, though, a customer may not want to use carrier services. So what they may want to look at is using a local trunk to their Pstn. And where we've seen this is in usually large state agencies where it's important for them to maintain a certain contract that they've got with a carrier, and they want to maintain those services. So if you know that you're part of a larger carrier contract, take that into account when you're looking at cloud-based services. So private cloud is a little bit different than the public cloud. And when you saw, excuse me, that last slide, public cloud, you're part of a larger multi-tenant environment. So it's kind of dictated by the services and features associated with that. We have seen incredible growth also in the private cloud. And what that means is instead of those applications residing in a public cloud, they're usually in a colo or in a partner data center. And it's usually done to provide more of a continuum from what currently exists in your environment. So Cisco and Avaya have the capability of being on-premise, but they also have the capability of being cloud and also private. So we basically pick up those applications, we move them into geographic distributed data centers. And those services don't look any different than what existed on-premise, but now they're sitting in a partner environment. What this does is it allows less training because there's really no change to what your end users will see. The partner now takes over a lot of that or all of that administrative duties associated with the data center, with the server hardware, VMware, and the applications. It also can allow more robust interoperability with third-party PBXs, such that if you've got an integration on-prem that's very important to you, but it's not available in a public cloud service, we can provide that also to your enterprise. And the last piece is there also may be a chance to reuse your existing endpoints. If you're moving to different vendors, in some cases they may make you change your endpoints and swap them out for ones that are supported on there. By just picking up and moving the applications to a partner-based data center, it may allow you to also hang on, keep the cost down associated with that migration by hanging on to your existing endpoints. So now let's look at the planning aspect of this. So in planning, what you really need to look at is workflows, and you need to understand and define those workflows. So workflows involve more than just, hey, I can call this number or call that number. It's, as mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is remove the burden of maintenance on these systems so that you can focus on your core functions of your business rather than the maintenance of these systems. So you need to look at your teams. How do your teams meet? Are they always in a conference room? Are there remote people joining in? So look at how meetings happen within your infrastructure. Are you adopting an agile project management methodology, which means a lot more meetings or stand-ups that happen? So understand what's going on in those. The tools that are associated with those. So UC is really a means to communicate and collaborate. In many cases, it's integrated into various applications that you've got within your infrastructure so that you can kick off a communication or a chat through those applications rather than having to jump into a different application, depending on what level of integration you want. What are some of the core tools and business applications that you've got? In most cases, we deal with Microsoft. We see a lot of Microsoft. So are you going to want to tie into Microsoft SharePoint or Outlook? Almost guaranteed that people are going to want to be able to schedule meetings and provide collaborative spaces using those tools. So we have to look at these. How does it tie into your CRM? Are you using ServiceNow? Those type of integrations we see a lot of. Are you modernizing your buildings and your physical spaces? In other words, are you seeing smaller huddle rooms, which is what we see, and conference rooms and how they tie in, and how are you doing dissemination of information from executive management out to the field? How do you do training? There's a lot of these pieces that tie in. If you can understand these features and functionalities and workflows that are required, then you can better understand how these tools can fit into your organization. The last is business process and how you can potentially interact with your customers and improve that, just make it more seamless. Because understanding these workflows and taking into and talking to your business groups can help you to identify the greatest impact for implementing your UCaaS. And it will also help you to identify key features required for your business. So now when you look at the migration plan, it's understanding the scope of the migration. Are we looking at doing the whole business? I talked earlier about integration. Integration is key here, since people live in certain applications, they may not live in other apps. So being able to tie in UC as a service into these applications could be a huge productivity benefit to the folks in your organization. You then need to account for the planned acquisitions or new offices. So as you may expand or there's a renovation happening, that might be an ideal time to pull in UCaaS or a section of UCaaS into your organization and to get more experience with it. And dealing with larger acquisitions and expansions can really help with that nimbleness that we had talked about and being able to scale real time. Then we want to look at the order of the migration. So where do we start? And if you can, and it's available to you, if you can start small, becoming more familiar with the platform through your IT department or through some small offices so that people can then get more experience with the new applications. And the other piece is here, we want to keep users informed and educated of the change. So part of this is education. There are many different ways of providing education, whether or not it's through hands-on training, whether or not it's through at-a-glance documents, whether or not it's through watching a YouTube. These are ways that we can address the migration plan. So now the specific migration plan associates with what are the key pieces here. And the first off is licensing. So if you're moving to a completely different vendor, it's going to be a whole new licensing scheme. But as we had talked about, some of the larger vendors do provide licensing schemes that allow you to buy a license and use it on-premise or use it in the cloud. So having that flexibility of using the license where it currently is being used, whether or not it's on-prem or in the cloud. Then you want to look at features. And when we had talked about workflow, that's where features really come in. Because not all features are in the cloud that you may have on-premise. We saw this also when we moved from TDM to voice over IP PBXs. In that case, Cisco was really moved forward with the Celsius acquisition, and yeah, it may have had 90% of the feature functionality that was in your TDM, but there was always that corner case of somebody using this one feature that, maybe the only person in the whole company that used it, but it could be a very important person. So you have to watch the features, and that's where understanding your business process and your workflows is really going to help in that situation. Then it's looking at your dial plan, or doing truncated dialing, or 4-digit dial, 5-digit dial, whatever the case may be. Are you using steering digits? Are you using 9 to get out? 911 is a consideration. I'll go into more depth on that in a little bit. Then you can look at the changes of UC applications as it relates to internal dialing. Hang on, let me back up on that one. So what you can do is the dial plan is having less and less of an environment these days due to the click-to-call capability. So as those of you with Android or iOS phones, you're clicking a contact. So it seems to have a less of an impact these days. Also, with a lot of cloud-based services, it's not so much 9 to dial out, it's just full 10-digit dial to get out. The other piece is carriers and looking at your carrier migrations, porting numbers, that has to be tightly coordinated with the projects. And having expertise in the carrier space is, and understanding how the carrier works. If you don't have that expertise in-house, then we recommend you get a service to help move those porting of numbers over so that it's as smooth as possible and seamless to the users. Class of service is important. Your lobby phones, maybe your conference room phones, you may want to limit where they can dial. So most services have that. And then looking at the integration. So identity is probably one of the key integrations that we're looking at right now. It's been an important part of most UC deployments these days, where you don't have to take into account, has somebody left? Do I remove their account from the system? By doing LDAP integration or identity management integration, it allows the folks who handle the hiring and firing of employees to address those accounts being deleted or activated accordingly, without having to pull you into the mainstream of that one. We had talked about network and DNS, important piece for finding services, not only IP addresses, but also finding services through SRV records. Email and calendaring, that's probably the biggest productivity gain we've seen with a lot of customers these days, is to be able to use these applications as easily as possible through your email and calendaring application. And then the necessary evil, which is PKI and certificates. They're critical to your security process, but you need to take that into account. So when we look at the network requirements, the key ones here are, how do you maintain quality first off? And when we're looking at the network requirements, it's, first of all, the capacity must not be greater than your maximum session. Now, are your maximum sessions meaning everybody hops on the phone and calls at the same time? Probably not. It tends to be very cyclical, and we're using statistical analysis to determine that. Kind of those of you who may have played with Erlangs. The other piece is latency. So latency must remain under 150 milliseconds one way. Most UCaaS providers, that's not a problem. Packet loss, keep that under 1%. Codecs are getting better in dealing with this, but these are the general guidelines. And then finally, jitter. In other words, what's the variability of these packets coming in, which is 30 milliseconds. Because a voice packet coming in late or being retransmitted is useless because it's out of order. That's why you see UDP rather than TCP situation. So then when you look at the voice bandwidth for G711 or G722, you're going to see about 90 kilobits per second in the RTP stream. The actual signaling itself is very low. It's like 8K in call setup, but it's the bearer channel of the RTP that takes about 900 kilobits per second. And then when you look at video, it's about 950 kilobits per second in that situation. And different codecs have different requirements. When you talk to your vendor, you can sort that out. So now, let me give you one of the nuances associated with UC as a service, where we've got this, we're going to go over a call flow. And UC as a service traditionally is being offered over the top or over the internet. So you're going to have an SBC associated to this service. It's going to go through your firewall, out through the internet to your cloud-based service provider. Now, when somebody goes to make a phone call, they're going to go out, consult, look at the directory. It's then, so 2000 is calling extension 1000. The signaling traffic, very low bandwidth, not as latency sensitive due to the fact that it just maybe delayed dial tone or something like that, would then say, hey, that's where extension 1000 is. So what happens is when the call is being established, the RTP stream starts. And the RTP stream also goes to the SBC. So 2000 calls 1000. We've established the 2000 in this picture here can talk to 1000, but it's only unidirectional. So you have to create one more flow, or one more flow gets created, such that 1000 can now talk to 2000. So bidirectional communications is happening in this situation, and you've got the full communication happening. So you look at the bandwidth requirements. When I was saying 90 kilobits per second, that's 90 kilobits per second times 4 in this situation. You need to take this into account when you're looking at UCaaS. So 911 and IP telephony. Some of you may be familiar with 911 and E911 requirements. Back in the old days, 911 was fairly straightforward due to the fact that it was a hard-coded line associated with the phone, and you knew exactly where it was. Now with 911 in a voice over IP world, there's no tie to where that phone exists. It could be anywhere. There are services out there that allow you to find that. You may have heard of Red Sky or West. They have the capability of tracking through IP address where that phone and mapping that location out. So that's the gist of the sensitive point associated with 911. Now, when we're talking with UCaaS, UCaaS doesn't support E911. And let me actually familiarize you with how 911 and E911. So first off, 911, you've got a phone, you've got a location, and then you've got an application at top. So what happens is when you build out 911, you are associating the telephone's phone number with a location, and that's what gets built out in what's called a PSLE database. And the PSAPs will see that when the telephone number, when that phone calls 911, it's going to see that phone number and it's going to see it at 123 Main Street, such that when they call 911, the emergency services will be sent to 123 Main Street. So this is 911. What E911 does is it adds an additional layer associated with it. So now we have the phone number of 4466. We have a location, but a location now has a phone number called an ELIN, or emergency location identifier. The mapping then happens between the ELIN and the location, such that, hey, this phone is sitting at IP address 10.1.2.3. That means it's at 123 Main Street, or this phone number. Then when it builds the PSLE database, it is the phone number of the location and the location, so that it actually changes the calling number, and such that when somebody calls 911, they then are sent to 123 Main Street. If the phone picks up and moves, it is now dynamic, such that it says, oh, wait, this phone has a new IP address. It is a different location. Thus, when 911 is called, a different phone number is sent, and such that services are getting to the right location. So UCaaS doesn't support enhanced 911. It is 911 play such that when you configure up the device and the directory number, it is assigned a location. And those locations are defined within the system. It is not dynamic, so that if somebody picks up and moves to a new location, you need to update the portal associated with it. It's not done automatically, but you just need to take that into account, especially in large campus environments and a very mobile workforce. You want to take that into account. All right, so we want to talk about security and compliance. Very critical here. When you're talking about identity management systems and being able to authenticate a user and then make sure that their information is secure and not compromised, also to prevent loss of information. So tying into your data services, you want to be careful and make sure that it's not something that can be compromised. Tying into secure apps and devices is associated with certificates and being able to authenticate and identify who you're talking to as being the person you're talking to. And in many cases, it's compliance with legal and regulatory. So whether or not it's PCI for financial information or HIPAA data for medical or FERPA for education, you want to make sure that when audits are happening, is this system part of that audit? And if you can keep it out of the audit, usually a benefit for those audits, but in many cases it has to be involved in the audit. And you just want to make sure that whatever service you're bringing in can meet those requirements. So when we talk about UC as a service, it brings up kind of a new service offering that's required to really support this real-time scalability. So that's called Lifecycle Services. In some cases, you may have heard it called customer success. And what that does is it allows you to work very closely with the partner vendor so that you've got a single point of contact to deal with the onboarding and offboarding, to deal with provisioning, deprovisioning of people, and what entitlements you have available to you. So look at them as a single point of contact that's part of your staff that really helps you to respond to the changes that are happening within your organization. They tie also closely with your finance department to help billing management, because it's a much more, hey, we're expanding. We've got 10 new employees joining us or 100 new employees. You want to be able to address that accordingly. And if you do a chargeback model, most companies don't these days, but you want to be able to respond to those people coming in. When renewals happen, you want to be able to right size. You want to understand how you're using the service. And one of the great things about UC as a service is the analytics portion of it. So now most companies in an on-prem solution don't know how they're using the system. They may see some CDR records or see contact center information, but the analytics now in UCaaS is tremendous. So you can really see how people are using the system. So this also helps in renewal management, such that you can right-size accordingly with your organization. And then when it's time for a subscription review, Lifecycle Service can bring in all the data and information. So this is kind of a look at all the applications that can be used in a UC as a service. There are a lot of small applications. I mean, let's start with the large ones with Salesforce, ServiceNow. I would say Microsoft is one of the biggest ones right now. But then there's also some of these add-ons like PagerDuty, like Splunk. There are a lot of pieces that vendors are really focusing on being able to expand their ecosystem so that you can use these applications, so that it's more seamless and easier, and it's not that, hey, this person has to hop into Box to do this, but they can do it through another application or an application they're more familiar with. So you're seeing a lot of these integrations when you are working with your employees and the customers, understanding those workflows and finding maybe there is a corner case of somebody using Slack, and why are they using Slack, and can we instead move that intellectual property internal and not have it go external to some service that may not even be paid for. It's just a free service. You want to be able to pull that in and provide that functionality. With that, I want to thank you for your time. I see we do have a question. As you're seeing growth with Google-based environments, are you looking at full DIA circuits, full SAS deployments for corporate and contact center on Google? Thank you. So there is the concept of collaboration platforms as a service. So a lot of this is more providing the compute and base level collaboration building blocks in these cloud-based environments, whether or not that's Google, whether or not that's in Amazon. So those are building blocks by which you or a partner would have to build the applications to do so. At the same point, there is also the need to integrate with various contact centers, with various identity management. They may be cloud-based, with document management, Box, Dropbox, that also tie into these, cloud working with cloud. So I'm not quite sure if that answers your question, but feel free to add another question or follow up.
Yeah, you know what, John, I think it's to the point of what you were saying earlier, right? It's really looking at a company's, the business requirements and the workflows and things of that nature. Does it make more sense for, dedicated internet access circuits versus, a lot of the UCaaS that we're seeing, a lot of times it's over the top type of configuration, and then to your point as well about carrier, where is the carrier going to fold into here as well, right? Am I going to do something with the session border controller on site? Am I going to have that be handled from the application itself? So there's a lot of deciding factors, and really it always still comes back around to, the business relevance of it and the priorities as a company, and then that kind of drives those decisions.
Yeah, and to add to that, I've also seen in the higher education space where they try to aggregate or provide direct connectivity to certain vendors that are strategic to them. So an example being is VM Cloud. If you're a large VMware shop and you've got some very strong cloud computing initiatives, and the volume just associated with that doesn't dictate that really over the top is the right way. Yes, we are seeing the requirements for using Equinix and being able to have direct trunks into key service providers is being very important to mostly large organizations. But in the education space, they're also looking at doing aggregate such that some of like Knox would provide those services, and instead of routing through commodity internet, you would route through these aggregation services to these services.
John, something else that came up here. You mentioned the, feature and functionality, UCaaS versus on-premise, and you kind of compared it to back when, when like Cisco's of the world and everything else started to jump into the Ip Pbx space. How much of a gap are we seeing, feature functionality-wise between the systems, or is it even definable really? Today?
It's a tough one to define. In many cases, people are saying, well, give me a full feature matrix for that platform and this platform, and then I'll compare them. And that's an eye chart looking at it. In general, we see that most services are provided in a UCaaS environment. It depends on, which vendor you're going with. But, you can feel fairly comfortable that standard, establishing a call, transferring a call, putting a call on hold works. When you look at other applications like maybe call recording, you need to confirm, that if you're doing call recording, why are you doing it? Is it compliance? Is it user triggered? Is it contact center related? You need to define that further so that you can make sure that you're not going to fall into a feature gap hole associated with the service.
Right. That kind of lends in. Another question came in here, John, saying, I'm jumping back into contact center space, and it's been a few years. How solid is contact center as a service, in your opinion, integrated with the full UCaaS environment?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I see that contact center as being kind of the lower hanging fruit in a UCaaS environment. It is something, I would say it's a technology that's a bit more mature in the scale of things. So when you look at like Five9 and what's the other one that it's escaping me that Genetech was involved with? Their UIs are credible, and the services are definitely on par with what you get for a contact center. Now, when you talk about contact center, in many cases, that's where integration is key. And what I've seen with the cloud-based contact center vendors is that they'll partner and they'll do a great job with like the ServiceNows and the Salesforces. But if you're using some smaller, less known CRM, they may not be able to address that. So, be wary of that in the case. But in general, I think contact center in the cloud is a very viable technology direction. Now, in regards to integration with UCaaS, that's another story, because you need to look at how that integration is happening. Is it a bolt-on? Is it integrated in the back end? Really kind of take a look at that. I'm not seeing as much maturity as I am seeing in the general contact center in the integration between UCaaS and a cloud-based contact center.
Great. Let's see.
Okay. Are you seeing growth with Google-based environments? We are looking. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, and then the contact center one. Yes.
I don't see any others coming through right now. If anything, we can probably give people a few more minutes back of their day. It's nothing like gaining 9 minutes of your day back. It's always a wonderful thing.
Sure, we could do that. Well, thank you everyone for joining our session of Carousel's monthly Always On virtual series. Shortly after we wrap, you will receive a brief survey requesting your input on today's session as well as your interest in future topics. As a thank you for taking the time to complete the survey, we will send you a Starbucks gift card, so your next cup of joe is on us. Next month, we will be joined by Carousel's Director of Security, Josh King, to discuss enforcement and containment with segmentation. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.